tender, hot and spicy, with a steamy look. It was passed on down by my mother, sweet. She told me, honey, this will be a real good treat, to turn a man's heart into a buttercream. Well, you cook a dish that makes him want jump and scream. So come into my kitchen,
Come into my kitchen.
come on down to my kitchen.
Come on down to my kitchen.
I said, come into my kitchen.
Come into my kitchen.
Come on down to my kitchen.
Come on down to my kitchen.
Won't you come into my kitchen and I will feed you fine.
Hi, this is Down East Far East Kitchen, and I'm Chris Toy, and I'm here with my friend Jeff Mao. Jeff, why don't you introduce yourself?
Hi, I'm Jeff Mao, and I'm a recent cookbook author, and we'll talk a little bit about that a little bit later. And otherwise, I've been a career educator and someone who's always just been a foodie. I even contemplated going off to culinary school after my first teaching job, but decided I'd rather be in I don't know if this is a good thing or not, I'd rather be in a classroom full of middle schoolers than in a hot kitchen as my day job. So I stayed in the education world and have continued to work in the education world and do so until now. But we're doing this cooking stuff too, so it keeps it fun.
That's right.
How about yourself?
Well, I like to eat. Chris Toy, and I am a repurposed educator. We don't say retired anymore, right? And I kind of came to cooking through my family. Both of my parents' families had restaurants, one in Milwaukee, Wisconsin called Toys, and another in Quincy, Massachusetts called King Joy. And when I asked my parents about the restaurant business, they said, go to college, you can decide later. All of your friends will have to be restaurateurs because when everyone else is playing, you'll be working. I didn't like the sound of that. I wanted to play with my friends. So went into education.
There you go. That's kind of how I made the same conclusion about being in a hot kitchen every weekend in the evenings, or not.
That's right. No weekends off.
Yeah, no weekends. So instead, I hung out with middle school kids.
There we go.
Some people would find that more torturous, but actually, I find middle schoolers are much easier to deal with.
They're awesome.
Yeah.
They're awesome.
All right. So today, I think we're going to talk a little bit about hot pot, and I thought we'd start off looking at the equipment itself and what is hot pot.
Yeah.
I think if you Google around for it, what you find is that there are two general things you tend to discover on the internet if you search for hot pot. One of them are kind of what we're going to talk about, which is pots of boiling broth at the table, and you cook your own food during your meal, and others which are basically just a big stew or a soup that is kind of served and cooked kind of in the kitchen and brought to the table.
Right.
But this is really more the kind of communal cook at the table style, Chinese style hot pot.
Yeah. I think the Scandinavians borrowed this idea and they called it fondue.
Right. Yeah, but there's in some ways can be a little bit more fun in the sense that it's melted chocolate or cheese, but it's not the kind of thing you can really make your dinner.
All right. So some of the toys. That's what we like.
So we've got a lot of stuff here. So you want to talk about this first one here is a gas cooker, right?
Yeah. So I use the gas cookers when I'm doing a class for a lot of people because you don't want cords all over the place. And these gas cookers, they're great. They use a little canister of butane, and they're really easy. You just kind of we won't do it right now, but you just basically flip a switch and you get this hot flame, and you'll just place your hot pot right on this like this. This is a kind of a one-piece hot pot with a divided pot, so you could do super spicy and meat on one side, and you do vegetarian mild on the other, or a mixture. So you kind of get the option. So that's a divided pot over the gas.
If you're looking for these, I think the nice thing is you'll actually find these in your average Walmart because it's really often billed as a camp stove. So it's the kind of thing you take camping, the butane fuel. You'll also find those at a Walmart or a Target or any kind of place that sells that kind of stuff.
Yep.
Usually I find one of those cans can go about 2 hours
Yeah.
or so. So you should be able to get through most of a hot pot meal, although sometimes a hot pot meal can take even longer if you're really just kind of hanging out with your friends. But
True. So what is
it's only
this?
A couple bucks, and then
This
so
is impressive.
yeah. So this is another split pot. You can see it's very big, very shiny, very heavy. This is a stainless steel. This is custom made in China by a group folks at the Mala Market. So they're a great website, themalamarket.com. It's a great place to find particularly like Sichuan chilies and some of those ingredients if you really want to make the hot and spicy hot pots that a lot of people have come to know. This is also a split pot. So you can see it's got the two sides. Not all of them are split, but you'll see that it's a pretty common thing to do. And it's sitting on top of an induction cooker. And so this is also just another countertop cooker, but it is electric, right? And because it's induction, what you cook on top of it needs to really be in contact. So this is a flat bottom, fits on top, and it needs to be magnetic, or this needs to, magnet should stick to this, so it needs to be made of iron of some sort. So aluminum pots won't work on an induction cooker. Nice thing about these are that they don't tend to heat up the room as much because the induction cooker heats the pot, and then the pot heats the liquid. This one is a butane flame, just like a gas stove, and so there's a lot of heat that will just kind of go up and around. And so if it's summertime and you're, you might heat up your house more than you really wanted it to. And then of course you do want to make sure that you vent when you're using a butane thing, so that,
Absolutely.
you don't get kind of stuffed up with all that. But the downside to these are that it does have an electrical cord, so depending on where your dining room table is and where the nearest electricity is, you may have to run an extension cable. Because you're running it through into a heating unit, I would get one of those like thick orange, utility cords, not
Heavy
just
duty.
not the little skinny ones you put in your desk just to turn on a lamp or something.
Right.
We've got a bunch of other ones over here too.
Yeah.
Different styles.
Yeah. So this one here, I got this because I actually had some clients where there were so many food allergies and preferences that I needed more than a two compartment hot pot. So this is a 3-compartment hot pot. So you can get them, like I don't know if you can get a 4 or not, but this is pretty cool. One thing that's going to be different here is that this is not quite as robust as the one that Jeff did.
Yeah.
And you can kind of see that, maybe you can't, but the welding marks actually kind of show through here.
Yeah. This one you
Here,
can't see. It's
it's
nice and
polished.
It's solid.
It's heavy. Yeah. And just really quickly, this is another electric one, and this one just is an electric, resistant element. And you just put this right on here, and that heats it right up. Interestingly, with this one here, when you turn the electricity on, it locks this in, so it can't move. It can't fall off. So that's kind of cool. And this is just another version of that. Again, they both need to be plugged in. And this one, doesn't have welds. It's kind of cast. So it's pretty good.
We've got
This one
another
here.
one here.
This
This one is
is-
more reminiscent of the traditional shape that some people might have seen.
Right. This is sometimes called the Mongolian Hot Pot. And this one's electric, but traditionally what happens is this shape here is actually where you would put hot coals, and it would heat this center column, which would then heat whatever's in here. This would be a chimney. This would be opened at the top. But this one's electric.
Yeah.
And what's kind of fun about this one is that you can actually use this top here to sear meats or shrimp or vegetables before you put it into the hot pot. It kind of browns things.
Nice.
So that's the Mongolian hot pot.
Nice. We've got a variety of different styles here, some of which are kind of a separate heating element to the pot, which some people like because, of course, you can use either of these two heating elements to cook most anything. I use my butane burner at my house a lot in the summer times, again, when it's hot and I don't have air conditioning, so I'll take it outside and cook on it. Or sometimes just right next to the barbecue because I need something in a regular pot, along with doing something on barbecue. So it's nice to have that flexibility. This one's electric, so I don't take it outside so much, but I do use it indoors sometimes on another burner.
Yeah.
And then there's these kind of what a lot of people refer to as all-in-ones, and you'll find any number of variations on the internet. If you go searching for these, you'll also sometimes find them listed as shabu shabu, which is the Japanese name for hot pot. Sometimes you'll see them labeled as steamboat. It's kind of the Southeast Asian term that refers to hot pot, but lots of different ways. And you'll find, I've even seen some that had, I think 5. So there was a circle in the middle, and then kind of a plus sign. So you have 4 on the outside and 1 in the middle. I don't know how much variation you really need for one meal, but if you want it, you can do it.
Yeah, and just one last thing: that the butane, as I had mentioned earlier, if you're entertaining and you have a dozen people, and you're going to have 3 of these things, and you don't want 3 extension cords, kind of for people to trip on, which wouldn't be a good thing.
You got little kids who can't sit in their chair.
Right. So the butane works pretty well. So that's the toys. There's a couple other toys we'll talk about in a minute.
Yeah.
But why don't we talk about some of the ingredients that go into hot pot, and also you've written a book about hot pot.
I have, and so
let's take a look.
So let's. All right. So we've got here a spread of some of the vegetables and sauces and things. Here's a copy of the book, so you can find this. Should be pretty much anywhere you find books sold online. I know a lot of folks like to buy their books from a local independent bookseller, so just check with them and you can give them the title. You can find this easily on Amazon. Search it out, or you can find it on my website at neednosh.com. But then you can always just copy down the titles, Essential Chinese Hot Pot Cookbook, and go to your favorite local reseller, bookseller in your town to save the local bookshops. And what we'll find here, though, I wanted to show you guys was a little bit about some of the different greens you can find. Of course, you can cook anything you want in your hot pot, but if you want to kind of delve into kind of more of the Chinese vegetables and things, you'll find some of these I think are pretty common. But one of the ones we don't have here, but I think everyone probably has seen at the grocery store, is Napa Cabbage, often referred to as Chinese cabbage, or at least in my family it was always Chinese cabbage long before I ever learned it was Napa Cabbage. Another one is Bok Choy. So I think a lot of people have seen this before. It's really bright white, thick stems, dark green leaves. You see this bok choy, which is a great vegetable. But then you also see these baby bok choy. That's what people refer to them. Sometimes you'll hear this referred to as Shanghai bok choy. But you can see the stems are green. It's smaller. A little bit more of a delicate flavor, I would say. And then you can even find Dwarf Bok Choy, which oftentimes you'll see has a much more whitish stem. It looks a lot more like the big bok choy, but interestingly enough, none of these are the same plant. So dwarf bok choy don't grow up to be bok choy, and these babies stay babies. This is as big as they get for the most part. They might get a little bit bigger, but not much. So these also do not grow up to these. It's just that I think our English names for these, they all just kind of became bok choy, and then we started throwing labels on them. Baby and dwarf and so on and so forth. But they're all actually slightly different. This one's, I think, I would say has a slightly more bitter-ish taste to it than these are a little sweeter. And then we have these two, which are pretty common. If you go to an Asian market, you're more likely to find these. I think you can find these in a lot of regular grocers these days. The dwarf, you might not. You might need to go to an Asian market to find these. You'll definitely find this in an Asian market. And this almost looks like it's the same plant, but it's actually 2 different plants here. I've got this one and this one. So over here we've got what just kind of loosely would be Chinese broccoli. If you really look at the stems, and when you cut into these, you'll find that the stem is very broccoli-like. It's pretty dense. It's got the same kind of crunch. And if you kind of work your way through the leaves, you'll find these little bits of those same kind of florets that you find in broccoli, or if you buy broccoli rabe or broccolini, same kind of thing. So you can definitely tell it's the same family of plant and similar flavor, but I would say a little sweeter than what you find in your kind of traditional American broccoli. And then this is choy sum, which is much more of a leafy vegetable than this one, at least as far as the stems. So the stems are a much lighter stem. These are a much denser stem. But both of them are equally good to eat. And usually for a hot pot, oftentimes I will end up chopping this into maybe thirds just so that it's not a whole leaf, because it's hard to pick this up with a pair of chopsticks and put this in your mouth. And likewise for these two. But those are some of the common greens. There's other ones out there that you might find. I know that in our local farmer's market at the right time in the summer I can find Tatsoi, which is kind of similar to this dark green, but it's got these really big leaves, really pretty. And then there's also some, you'll find at the Asian market, sometimes you'll find what they call Chinese celery, which doesn't really look like celery because it doesn't have these big long stalks, and it's mostly stalk. At least that's what we see at most American markets. It's got a lot more leaf to it, but if you really look at it, the stalks are a little bit more celery-like. And you'll also find Chinese spinach, which is very spinach-like, but again, longer stalks than I think what you might see on what we usually find in the stores. And you might find other greens too, whose names I probably don't even know. Then I also wanted to point out mushrooms, because mushrooms is another great thing to eat in a hot pot. We've got lots of different kinds. These mushrooms were packaged up in a packaging. This one they refer to as seafood mushroom. It looks a lot like these, but I'm pretty sure they're actually a different mushroom because these never grow as tall as these do. But these are good. These actually have a bit of a seafood-like smell to them, which is where they get their name. And then Enoki mushrooms, I think many people have seen these. And if you're going to use these in your hot pot, just break them up into smaller bits because this is one big chunk. But then I also want to point out these here. We've got a number of different mushrooms that are really good in hot pot and other things. The first ones are the simplest ones. We've probably seen these. This is a white button mushroom that has been growing longer. So if you let a traditional white button mushroom grow long enough, it'll turn into this one, which is called a cremini mushroom. And if you let this one grow long enough, eventually it turns into the portobello mushroom. But they're actually the exact same mushroom. It's kind of like green bell peppers and red bell peppers. You let the green bell pepper stay on the vine long enough, it turns red. Which is why you'll find that a portobello mushroom probably costs a little bit more because they had to take care of it at the farm longer. But otherwise, they are the same mushroom, although you will find the flavor does get a little bit more rich, I think, as you get toward portobello, the longer you let them grow. And then these are what are called the hen of the wood mushroom. And so I know that these have become really popular in a lot of kind of plant-based diets because if you batter those up and deep fry them, it almost kind of tastes like chicken nuggets. I think that's where you get the hen of the wood kind of thing, although they'll be the most expensive chicken nuggets you've ever made. But these are really great mushrooms. This is a trumpet mushroom. These are great mushrooms. These usually, for a hot pot anyway, you just kind of slice it into coins. You can also stir fry them. It's mostly stalk as opposed to the head of the mushroom, or the cap. But these are also good, solid, kind of meaty to them. And then these two are actually the same mushroom, just kind of a slightly different variety, darker tops and lighter tops. And at the market I picked them up at, they're called Hansheim or Han Shimeji. A couple different names I've seen attached to these. But these are a kind of a light flavor, not too overly strong for those people who don't like really strong flavored mushrooms. But I also like all of these things in stir fries and things. So if you buy too much mushroom, like this is a lot of mushroom actually for a hot pot meal, especially if it's just Chris and I eating, I'll take the leftovers and I turn them into stir fries later. So those are some of the mushrooms. And then there's some other things I wanted to kind of show you guys. You know, tofu gets a bad rap, I think, for a lot of folks. So this is one version. This is a fried soy bean curd. They're little squares that have been deep fried. So these are little kind of puffy pillows, but these are great because they're kind of like little sponges, so they'll kind of soak up flavor. And then back here, I've got dried bean curd stick. So this definitely needs to be soaked. Just put it in cold water for at least 8, 10, 12 hours. Usually just try and remember the day before. And then it really softens up, and then you can slice it into pieces. Ends up being a little bit chewy, but good flavor. And I think, you know, different ways of seeing tofu as opposed to the traditional blocks that you'll find in the market. Another trick for you in the hot pot world would be if you get either a firm or an extra firm block, which are probably the most common ones in most American markets, and take it still in the packaging, and when you get home, and don't put it in the fridge, put it in the freezer and let it freeze at least solid for at least a full solid day, and then just transfer it back to your refrigerator and let it thaw out. And then when you're ready to do a hot pot with it, or it's actually good for stir fry too, when you cut it open and drain out the liquid, you'll find that a lot of people will often like press their tofu and get more of the liquid out. If you freeze it once, you can really squish it, and the liquid really comes out. And what stays behind, though, the actual bean curd, the structure actually gets a lot firmer in a kind of way, and so you get this really this firmer texture that doesn't kind of fall apart when you try and squeeze it. You get more of the liquid out, which just means as you're putting it into a sauce, or in this case in a hot pot broth, it's going to soak up more flavor. So frozen bean curd. So if you go to a hot pot restaurant, you'll often see on the menu even, they sometimes will say, oh, if you want, you can have frozen bean curd. And if you're thinking, they're going to bring me a piece of frozen, it's not frozen anymore, but it has been frozen once, and that really changes the texture. A couple other things, just I think many of us are probably familiar with these mushrooms. These are dried shiitake or black Chinese mushrooms. These are kind of the most ubiquitous Chinese mushroom that you tend to see in a restaurant and in foods. The bigger the bag you buy, the less they cost, at least on a per ounce basis. So if you buy the little itty bitty bags, they seem really expensive. You buy a big giant bag, and this bag will last for a long time. So definitely look at that. Another mushroom that is frequently eaten and referenced in a lot of recipes is called a wood ear or tree ear mushroom. These are ones that I think a lot of folks sometimes they see the name and they don't know what they're looking for. Usually, every once in a while, I do see them fresh, but pretty rare. Typically, I find them dried like this, and they kind of they look like this in a dried way, and then you're gonna just like the other ones, you're gonna end up reconstituting these in water, soaking them in water. These in particular really grow. So like a dried shiitake mushroom gets a little bigger, gets a little puffier, but it's not going to really change in size. If you take a piece of this mushroom that maybe is, the size of the palm of your hand, after it's soaked up, it's going to be, like 3 or 4 hand size. I mean, it can almost quadruple in size. So definitely be aware that a little bit of this goes a long way, but adds a great crunch to just about anything you add it to. And then... So before we get into the hot pot, I then want to talk about sauces. So one of the things that really sets Chinese hot pot apart from some of the other variations that you find, the shabu shabu in Japan or steamboat in Southeast Asia, is kind of a fixation on sauce. There is no one sauce. So if you've been to a hot pot restaurant and someone brought you some sauce, and then you ask all your friends, well, what was that sauce? I want to make it at home. They probably won't be able to tell you, because usually what you find, you'll find something a little bit more like this, but in a kind of restaurant fashion. You'll find a salad bar filled with different ingredients, sauces, and chopped garlic and cilantro and other ingredients like that. And people will literally take a bowl and just start mixing their own sauce. And that's really the best part, is that you can make up your own sauce. So I was going to just mix up a quick one. This tends to be what I do for myself. One of the ways in which I do this. This is Zhenjiang vinegar or black vinegar. There's a number of different types of black Chinese vinegar. This is one of the ones that I think is more popular. So as you go to an Asian market, look for the ones that either say chin kang. I don't even know how you pronounce that. How do you pronounce that? I've seen it spelled this way, chin kiang, but I've also seen it with a Z, Zhenjiang vinegar. You can tell I'm an American-born Chinese. I don't speak any Chinese except for a couple foodstuffs, but obviously not this one. But anyway, a little bit of this vinegar. This vinegar is not as... so there's maybe I'm not going to make a ton of sauce here, but that's about a teaspoon. So in relative terms, you got a teaspoon of that. And then I'm going to want some hot oil. This is actually some Sichuan Chili Oil that I made from scratch, which, fortunately, there's a recipe for this in that book. It's not hard to make. It just takes a number of different ingredients to kind of steep together, and this started off as just canola oil, and now look at the color. But you can tell this is hot. So I'm just going to put in not even a whole teaspoon of this, maybe a half a teaspoon of the oil. And a little bit of soy, same thing. I'm going to for me, I like the bite of the vinegar, so I'm just going to put, again, maybe a teaspoon of soy, and then just like a little bit of a drizzle of some sesame oil. Sesame oil. Oh, this has a little drippy thing on it. And then I need some garlic. Where was the garlic? Here's the garlic. So I've got a clove of garlic, and I'm just gonna smash that, and then that gets the skin off pretty easily. And then just chop this thing up. Oh, that's a nice knife, Chris. Here we go. And just mix that in there. So that's just a simple little dipping sauce. So as I'm cooking food in the hot pot and then taking it from the broth to my bowl, I'll dip it in this before I eat it. I was listening to another podcast talking about hot pot the other day, and the folks on that one, there were a couple of professional chefs and others, they were talking about needing more than one bowl. And I actually even kind of referenced that a little bit in the cookbook, that if you set up a sauce bar, something like this, in your house when you're doing hot pot, you may want to have more bowls than you have people, because people kind of like at a salad bar, they want to go back and try something different. But just a quick little run through here. This is a pretty popular brand of what is called, it's loosely translated as barbecue sauce, but you also see it labeled as sa-cha sauce. This is really nothing like any barbecue sauce you've ever seen in the United States. It's made mostly of brill fish and dried shrimp. So it's a very much of an umami bomb, but it's also kind of got a bit of that kind of fermented fish funk to it, right? These are just a couple of hot chili oils that I like. This one is a Li Kum Ki from Guizhou. It's the Guizhou style black bean chili sauce, so it's got some heat, but it's also got the fermented black beans in it. This is the one that I think has taken the United States by rage, the spicy chili crisp from Lao Gama, right? Lots of people like this one. This is another one. This is the chili oil with black beans from the same company, Lao Gama. Thing to remember is that Lao Gama is not a sauce, it's a company, right? And I think they have 16 or so different sauces. And so if you like one, you can seek out the other ones. You may like their other ones as well. We've got a couple different variations on fermented bean curd. This one has a little bit of red chili in it. This is just plain white fermented bean curd. There's also what you'll find red fermented bean curd in the shop. This again is the vinegar. This is sesame sauce. So this is basically just like tahini, except that the sesame seeds that were used to make this were first roasted. So similar to the roasted sesame oil that has that kind of more rich smell to it that you get from this toasted sesame oil. The sesame seeds here were toasted first before they were ground into this paste. This paste gets added into other sauces, typically to make a base. And again, I've got another recipe on that, and a pretty common way that people tend to have a base sesame sauce. One thing to note about this, as you find in the stores, look for ones that say sesame sauce. Look at the ingredients, make sure you can read them and see what's in there, because they also make variations on this that have peanuts, but it won't say peanuts in the English. And like, I have a son who doesn't like peanuts because he's allergic to peanuts, and so I have to make sure I buy the right one so I don't send him into an allergic problem, right? And again, here's that chili oil that I made. So got that. All right. So should we set up this? Why don't we set up this broth? So we've just got some water. We've actually done a little bit of cooking. That's why there's a little bit of froth here. So don't worry about that. It's really just plain water. Think of it that way. And today, just for simplicity, we're just gonna use a little bit of this Better Than Bouillon. This is great stuff. Just to add into this broth, rather than doing a really long, protracted thing. Not that they're difficult, but in this much time, we don't have the time for this. So I'm going to use a little bit of this roasted garlic base, just to get a little bit of flavor. For the amount of liquid here, I'm going to put in a good dollop. This is probably about a tablespoon's worth of this, and stir that in there. And then likewise, I'm going to take some of this just straight vegetable. And as you can see from this perspective, what I've got going so far is this is a vegetarian broth, which is pretty easy to do, right? Garlic and the veggie base. But that's going to give us some good flavor. And then remember, as you cook more and more foods in your hot pot, you're just going to continue to flavor the broth. Because what is broth after all? It's just foodstuffs that have been bubbling away in boiling water or simmering water for a long time. And so if you want to make your own broth, there's plenty of recipes in here that, what I try to do is give you a kind of flavors from all over China, some of which were traditional hot pot broths and some of which are based more on just traditional flavors from certain parts of the country. But here you can see this is really quick. The nice thing about hot pot is it doesn't have to be complicated. It can be really easy. So we can just get some veggies, chop them up, make some broth, and then we're going to show you how to make some shrimp balls today.
Thanks for that introduction, Jeff. And so now all this has made me very hungry. So we're going to get down to putting the hot pot together. So what we'll do is make some shrimp balls, which is really simple. And what I like about using the shrimp for the shrimp balls is that they're very springy. They have a really nice mouth feel to them. So I've just got about a half a pound of shrimp here, and a half a pound of shrimp will easily make a dozen good sized shrimp balls. And to that, we're going to add a couple tablespoons of cornstarch. And what that will do is that will help the shrimp to bind together. And we're going to add a tablespoon of cooking wine for flavor. And I use a Shaoxing wine. This is one of the more popular types of Chinese cooking wine. If you can't get this, you can get it in Asian markets. I haven't seen it in the regular grocery stores yet, but some health food stores will have it. I think you can also order it as well online. But if you can't get that, using the Japanese mirin is pretty close. It's a little bit sweeter, but that works well. And we're also going to put in about a 1/4 teaspoon of salt and 1/4 teaspoon of white pepper, just for a little bit of heat and flavor. There we go. And if you want, you can add sesame oil is good here. If you want it to have a little kick, you could use spicy sesame oil or put in some more red pepper. And what we'll do is we're just going to process this up. It's really quite fast. We want it to be a paste. And when you do this by hand, what you usually do is you'll get a bowl and you'll chop up the shrimp or fish. You can make fish balls, and you'll actually grab the chopped up shrimp and you'll slam it into the bowl, and then just keep doing that, and it basically creates a paste. It breaks down the protein and things like that. This is a shortcut. And when you do it with the slamming it in the bowl, you would then put it in the refrigerator for several hours and let that paste kind of solidify. But this works quite well. I'm just going to give this a little bit of a stir. And another shortcut. I'm going to describe the way you would make these shrimp balls, but since I don't want to wash my hands constantly, I'm not going to actually do it. But the way you would do this normally is you would grab a handful of this paste, and then you would squeeze, and a ball would form, and then you would take the ball and you would just kind of put it right into the broth, and you would just kind of keep doing that. What I use is a melon baller. And so I'll just take this, and I'll just drop those right in there. There we go. And when they rise to the top, they're kind of sunk in there now, but when they rise to the top, they're done. And what's nice is that you don't really have to rush to get them out. They don't overcook. They're not going to dry out on you because they're in the broth. So I'll go with 4 of those for now because I'm really hungry. So let's talk a little bit about
make your own sauce.
No, we're going to use your sauce. you know, when the master makes the sauce. Okay, we'll do that. So we're going to let these cook, and while we're doing that, let's talk a little bit about some other things that we can put in. And generally speaking, you're going to want to put things in the order that you'd like them to cook. So there's things that you really want to make sure they're cooked. And so you're going to put those in first. And this is a pretty quick process. So these are little neck clams, and they were actually harvested like right down the road from us at a place called the New Meadows River. And so these little necks, we're just going to slide these in, and they'll literally take about 2 or 3 minutes. All right, and you'll know they're done because they'll open up. They're bubbling now. They're cooking. So another thing that you can use, which is great fun, is the gailan, and because the gailan is pretty robust, you're going to slice those kind of diagonally into bite-sized pieces, as well as the leaves. You also want to make sure you rinse these well, because sometimes, they're grown in the soil, and you just want to make sure that that soil is gone. So we'll just sprinkle those guys in. So that's great. And here's the baby. This is the Dwarf Bok Choy, and what's great about the Dwarf Bok Choy is you can just slice that right in half. Kind of exposes the heart, and we'll put those in. I'm going to put those in close to the end because they're going to cook pretty fast. But a minute or so for those in the boiling broth is good. My shrimp balls are floating nice and high, and they've turned white. I can kind of show you. There they are. So those are great, and they're going to be nice and springy, a little sweet from the wine. And a couple proteins that I'll put in. So this is thin sliced beef, and we'll just put those in. And when the Japanese do this, the word shabu shabu, which is the Japanese word for their hot pot, what it is actually, that's the sound that the meat makes when you swish it in the pot. And you can see, literally 10 or 15 seconds, it's ready to eat. And the last thing I'm going to put in, my favorite, is squid. And I like to use the tentacles. And the squid, you have to cook it in like under a minute, because if you go beyond that, it gets rubbery, and then you have to cook it for hours.
Yeah.
So we'll just kind of put that in, and the squid is done when the tentacles curl, and they will curl within the first 10 or 15 seconds. That's done. So once you've got all of your ingredients in there, there's one little tool which is kind of important to have. Yes. And there's one for you. And do you want some rice? Or not?
I'll get the rice separately.
Okay.
This is where you sometimes need more than one bowl.
That's right.
I like to have my sauce in one bowl, rice in another.
That's right. So, so if you take a look, here's our clam. Here's our shrimp ball. Take a couple of those guys.
Gonna rescue this
That's right. Get
squid
that, get
before
that
it
squid.
gets chewy.
For sure. And there's the meat. And the bok choy. And the gailan.
So in your household, Chris, when you're doing a hot pot, would you normally see folks putting lots of food in like we just did, or a bite at a time?
It would be just a bite at a time.
Yeah.
And what you would do is you would put in what you want to eat first, and then you would take that out, and while you're eating, you would then put in the next one, and so you can kind of get this kind of train going. So the sauce is on the bottom, right?
Yeah.
And so we're kind of dipping that into that. Oh my. Yum.
So the other things that we didn't have today, I think we weren't unable to find them at the store today when we were looking, was root vegetables. There's another popular thing to have at hot pot. Those also typically will go in early. So oftentimes if you have just simply potatoes or sweet potatoes, lotus root or taro root. Those will go in early just because they take much longer to cook, sometimes anywhere from 5 to 12, 14 minutes, depending on how big you cut some of those pieces in chunks. But they then, they'll eventually get soft, and then they'll start to soak in some of that flavor. Here we've got a daikon radish.
Yeah, so daikon is a Japanese radish, and daikon literally means big root, which it is. But what you can do is you can take this is called the julienne peeler, and you can just take that, and it will make these noodles. So it's kind of like the original, what are those vegetable noodlers? I don't know what they're called, but you can make, these are daikon noodles. And these will cook in a couple minutes because they're so thin, which is great. But they'll stay crispy, which is fun. So Jeff, any other kind of parting things as we enjoy what we've made?
Well, I guess the other pieces that we don't have today that are also common in a hot pot would be dumplings. Other balls, so besides shrimp balls, there's meatballs and there's fish balls, things like that. People like dumplings, and then also people usually like noodles of some sort, whether it's rice noodles or wheat noodles. Those also tend to get cooked later, although it really doesn't matter. I think the first rule of hot pot is that there are no rules. But some people have a certain order in their mind where they do like to start with the root vegetables first because they take longer. Then maybe they'll start using some of the meats because they're so fast so they can immediately begin to start eating.
Right.
If you have a split pot and you are doing a really hot, spicy broth on one side, some people will avoid taking leafy green vegetables and putting them in the spicy broth because the spicy broth, one of the things that makes a spicy broth hot is that there's usually a lot of oil in it. Like the very traditional Sichuan broth is made with beef tallow. And of course, all those heat compounds, the capsaicin and all the spices, they're oil soluble, so they get right into the oil. And then if you take a leaf and drop it in and pull it out, there's so much surface area that you pull out a lot of heat, and that can be a bit of a firebomb for your mouth. So they might do the greens in the regular broth, but then maybe the meat and other things like that they'll put into the hot broth, and that helps to help flavor that meat, and then the meat flavors the broth. And I guess, forgot to point out also, there's any number of other ways to get hot pot broth. You can go from scratch, and again, we'd love to have you check out the cookbook, but then you can see here, this is from Lee Kum Kee, which is one of the, I think probably the biggest sauce brands in the world. This is a Sichuan style hot spicy soup base, right? So you just mix this in with water, and you'll get that Sichuan hot chili broth. Here's another company's version of the same thing. I can even feel in here. This is kind of a hard paste inside. So this has really got that beef tallow base. I can tell is probably what's holding that together. And here's another one that's hot and spicy, and yet another one that's hot and spicy, all by different companies. But then there's lots of different flavors. Here's one that is a soup base, just a seafood soup base, a tomato base. Tomatoes are a really popular soup base for hot pots in China. So it's one of the few places you see a lot of tomato, which is interesting given that tomatoes have been in China for a long time. Yeah. And in fact, China is the largest producer of tomato products in the world. Can you believe that?
That's amazing.
So out in western China, Xinjiang province, they produce like most of the world's tomato paste comes out of that province. But you don't see tomatoes as kind of in most Chinese cuisines like you do, say, Italian cuisine. It wouldn't be Italian cuisine without tomatoes. Right? And then here's a shrimp soup base. So there's lots of different ones. So if you want to just try out some of these flavors, you can just find them in an Asian market. These I actually bought online. So you can go to Amazon or lots of these H Mart or there's an Asian Mart. There's lots of different websites that sell Asian foodstuffs. You can find these. Very simple way to get different flavors if you want to try and experiment with them.
That's great.
So yeah, I'd say anything. It's fair game.
Yep.
Also just other fish, other meats, whatever.
Yep. So for me, what I do is I've taken a little bit of rice, and I've got my ingredients and what's left of my sauce on the bottom, and I've got this broth, and I just kind of pour that over and it makes a really nice kind of rice soup with the ingredients. And of course, the broth is amazing now because we've cooked seafood, beef, veggies, all kinds of things into that broth.
All right. Well, enjoy your first hot pot. Hopefully, it's a great way to have a family gathering. We didn't quite show it off today, but typically, if you're going to use mushrooms or vegetables, chop them up in advance, set them out on plates around the table so that people can just simply transfer those raw ingredients into the pot and cook them as they please, and then get them some spider strainers so they can retrieve their food more easily. Some foods, if you're not really down with your chopstick foo, you may need one of these to get them out.
That's right.
So,
Well, that was fun.
yeah.
Thanks for joining us. And we'll see you next time.
There's dumplings in the chicken. It's very finger licking. Won't you come into my kitchen and I will feed you fine? I said, come into my kitchen. Come into my kitchen. Come on down to my kitchen. Come on down to my kitchen. Won't you come into my kitchen? Come into my kitchen. Come on down to my kitchen. Come on down to my kitchen. Won't you come into my kitchen